All right, I'm continuing my book review, Stephen Weinberg's Dreams of a Final Theory. I wanted to get into his trashing of creationism. He he says he's calling these would-be sciences astrology, precognition, channeling, clairvoyance, telekinesis, creationism, and their kin. And he goes on further to trash creationism. Says teaching us that there is no room in nature for astrology, telekinesis, creationism, or other superstitions. I see this goes back to a point I'm making from the beginning of this book and his approach to understanding physics and nature and science, is that unless you can explain the origin of nature, your explanations are going to be incomplete. Creationism is a science that actually encompasses origins of nature itself. So if you get to an explanation of reality that addresses origins of reality, you end up with a more meaningful explanation. Something that an explanation that's many times infinitely more profound. If you being open-minded and you want to observe nature and explain it, then if you a priori rule out a possible explanation, you're never going to arrive. You're never going to get there. I don't care how smart you are, how hard you try. Ultimately, this is a great book that Stephen Weinberg wrote. There's lots of interesting observations and so forth. But it's inconclusive and kind of, when you're finished, you've got that empty feeling of the explanations have been not forthcoming. If God created the universe, then to rule that possibility out in your explanation, you're automatically never going to arrive at the correct explanation. There's no, I can't see anybody convincing me. I've read quite a few articles and books on physics and so forth, that the God hypothesis has to be discarded. That somehow, it doesn't make sense to that approach. Just, I think, is ultimately going to be defeating. You have to get to the bottom of that question, and I think that you have to get to the bottom of the question if you're ever going to have a satisfactory explanation for reality. Okay, that's the creationism, evolution subjects that he brought up. Now he's actually got a chapter called "What About God," and so he's going to touch the topic, but I think that he fails to get to the bottom of it. One of the things he does is he talks about, he quotes from King David about how the glory of God and the heavens shows his handiwork. He says this is Weinberg now. The stars tell us nothing more or less about the glory of God than do the stones on the ground around us. In one sense, that's correct, because the stones and the stars require an explanation for their origin. Cosmic explosion is not an explanation of an origin. It's you have to then ask. You have to be able to address the question: what exploded? Where did the energy come from for the explosion, and so forth? I think the Big Bang is totally bankrupt in terms of an explanation. It doesn't get to you're not going to get to an appropriate explanation of the origin of the universe if you start with less than infinite energy and infinite information. So the Big Bang is the wrong starting point. You can't get there from here, so to speak. So, and the other thing is the issue with the comparison of the stones and the stars. In that respect, you could say they're equal, but it's much more obvious the stars require a vast amount of space, probably infinite space. That's why they're not falling in on each other, and many cosmologists believe that they're receding from one another. So that's most of his observations bring me to the same argument. From my point of view, is that he's failing to address origins. His explanation, his investigation of God in the theory, I think it's pretty well done, but he misses a really, really, really important point, and it's not just him. I think that probably 99.9% of all cosmologists and physicists and scientists in general miss this point. And I'll have to get to it later. I just want to continue to address stuff that I found in Weinberg's book here, Dreams of a Final Theory. He says that why is the universe built to follow certain physical laws and not others? God knows, Einstein once remarked to his assistant, Ernst Strauss, that what really interests me is whether God had any choice in the creation of the world. On another occasion, he described the aim of the enterprise of physics as not only to know how nature is and how her transactions are carried through, but also to reach as far as possible the utopian, seemingly arrogant aim of knowing why nature is thus and not otherwise. And thereby one experiences, so to speak, that God himself could not have arranged these connections in any other way than that was what factually exists. I agree partly with Einstein, but even he there is missing the origins dynamic. The why, what he's asking in a sense is, does God have a choice sort of in creation? I would say no, but that doesn't mean that nature is a sufficient explanation. You still need God. And the reason I say that about, no, is that my understanding of God from the Bible is that he's only going to do what's best, and he's not going to do sort of second best. So that we see the enormous efficiency in creation and so forth, because the God knew up front how it was to be done successfully. So that's one thing that I would sort of agree that when we do understand sort of a final theory, there is going to be that element of, well, it sort of had to be this way, but it couldn't be anyway if it weren't for God in the first place. So just to say it had to be this way is not something that circumvents God, like I think that it was inferred in Weinberg's book here. Now, I was saying he has an excellent, Weinberg has an excellent epistemology when it comes to certain things, and especially when he comes to defending, the definition of God, because Weinberg is smart and he knows that the meaningful God is one that it actually has a will of his own and is in a position to interact with his creation. So I wanted to get into that next, Weinberg's definition of God and so forth, because it's very